This video is brought to you by Squarespace. From websites and online stores to marketing tools and analytics, Squarespace is the all-in-one platform to build a beautiful online presence and run your business. Check out Squarespace through the link in the description below. More on them in a bit. Imagine a road so long that it will take you a month to travel from end to end, driving through frozen plains, luscious jungles, dangerous mountains, and arid deserts. It's a journey that will test your nerves, as you may have to avoid reckless drivers and hostile narcos, but also a trip that will expose you to breathtaking natural sights and engineering marvels. This is definitely not your ordinary daily commute, although London's M25 might take you just as long on a Friday afternoon. The road I'm talking about is the Pan American Highway, or Autopista Americana, the longest motorable road in the world. So, adjust your mirrors and buckle up for today's video as we explore the countries traversed by this tarmacked backbone of the Americas. Let's start with some interesting geographic facts about this impressive road. The Pan American Highway connects the furthermost tips of North and South America, stretching for a distance of over 48,000 kilometers or 30,000 miles. The starting point of the journey may be Ushuaia in Argentina. From there, adventurers can travel in a northern direction until they reach their final destination, a town in Prudhoe Bay, Alaska, named Deadhorse. This highway was not conceived as a single project from the start. I'll get into its history later, but the Pan American is the result of several different developments which became interconnected over the 20th century. The main stretch of the highway is the one connecting the city of Nuevo Laredo on the Mexican-US border with Argentine capital Buenos Aires. Up to this day, it is only this segment which is actually considered to be the official Pan American Highway. The other sections, stretching north and south, are unofficial elements. All in all, these official and unofficial ribbons of asphalt tie up a neat continental package of 14 American countries. From Deadhorse to Ushuaia, these are the United States, Canada, the United States again, Mexico, Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, Panama, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, Argentina, Chile, and Argentina again. Along the way, one may experience all the major climate zones and landscapes that Earth has to offer, from Arctic tundra to boreal forests to tropical jungles and inhospitable deserts, from expansive prairies to the steepest mountains. Completing the whole road trip will surely eat up all of your vacation allowance. According to Google Maps, you could make it in about 12 days if you really wanted to push yourself, but that's not considering traffic, pee breaks, or the minor factor that most people require sleep. If you factor in diversions for sightseeing, I highly recommend it. It may take months to finish the journey. But if one sticks to the long asphalt snake, the fastest time by car is 23 days, 22 hours, and 43 minutes. By motorbike, the record is 34 days. And we have a special shout out to Austrian legends Michael Strasser, who cycled the whole 30,000 miles in 84 days, 11 hours, and 50 minutes. With the basics covered and the engine all warmed up, well, it's time to start our trip. The first leg of the journey, moving from north to south, is one starting from Deadhorse, Alaska. This is an unofficial stretch of the Pan Am, whose official designation is Dalton HIghway. This road was built in 1974 in a support capacity to the Trans-Alaska Pipeline System, and it stretches across inhospitable terrain and weather. In 2011, it was considered both by ABC and BBC to be one of the most dangerous highways in the world due to icy asphalt, terrible visibility, and the constant potential danger of avalanches. Temperatures here may plummet to minus 62 degrees Fahrenheit, minus 52 Celsius, and there are about 240 miles, that's 384 kilometers of road, without maintenance services of any kind. So better stock up on fuel and pretzels before tackling this road. From the town of Fairbanks, the Dalton links to the Alaska Highway, the next segment of this odyssey. As the name suggests, the Alaska Highway crosses most of, well, actually Canada, but let me explain. This highway was built in 1942 by 10,000 troops from from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. The purpose was to link up Alaska with the other 48 states south of Canada in case of a Japanese invasion. The idea was that the Army could have rapidly deployed additional troops to defend the northernmost territory. After some 1,390 miles, the Alaska Highway terminates at Dawson Creek, British Columbia, no relation to Katie Holmes or James Van Der Beek. From there, another 365 miles will lead to Edmonton, Alberta. Here, the traveler has two choices to navigate the states until the Mexican border. The first option is to leave Alberta, enjoy the views offered by Saskatoon, and aim for Minneapolis via North Dakota. From there, travelers can follow Interstate 35, driving all the way to Nuevo Laredo, cutting through Dallas. This route is almost 2,560 miles long. The second option is to make another Canadian stop in Calgary, then cross the line over to Billings, Montana. From there, drivers can say hello to Colorado, holler to New Mexico, and howdy to Texas, where they can rejoin Interstate 35. This one is slightly shorter at 2,370 miles. Now that we are in Nuevo Laredo, we can proudly announce that we are at the official starting point of the Autopista Americana. I'll be using that name too from now on because the rest of the countries we'll be visiting primarily speak Spanish. And as we have covered some of the geography of the Autopista, it's time to dig into some of its history too. The early plans to connect the Americas via land were conceived by sea. In late 1866, Hinton Rowan Helper, the U.S. consul to Argentina, was traveling from New York to Buenos Aires on a ship called Lord Clarendon. As he endured the long voyage, plagued by seasickness, Helper had the first embryo of an idea in his vomit-prone head, an intercontinental railroad along a north-south axis. The idea carried some serious weight. It wasn't just about sparing a consul some uncomfortable trips to the Privy, it was about cementing trade and diplomatic relationships across a dozen countries belonging to an isolated continent, far removed from the commercial and political epicenters of Western Europe. And of course, it would have become a tool for the US government to extend their political, diplomatic, and military influence over South America. Despite all the best intentions, this railroad never materialized. The US originally proposed it at the first Pan-American Conference in 1889. However, no agreement was reached for such a costly enterprise, and the plans were dropped. When American states convened again in Chile for their fifth conference in 1923, the railway had morphed into a highway. Travel on rubber rather than tracks was quickly becoming a more cost-effective option for international haul. 2 years later, the first Pan-American Highway Conference was summoned in October 1925 in Buenos Aires, with plans presented for a highway starting in Mexico and running to the Argentine capital. In 1929, Panama, Costa Rica, Honduras, and Guatemala all announced the imminent start of the first surveying works for the Central American stretch of the Autopista, which took place between 1930 and 1933. In 1934, Mexico initiated the work to lay down the first segment of the highway leading into Guatemala. This was completed 16 years later in 1950. The plan was to continue further south to Panama. The resulting road would have been known as the Inter-American Highway. This next stretch of road was inaugurated more than 10 years later in 1961. In the meantime, participating nations had founded the Permanent Committee of the Pan-American Congress of Highways, an institution dedicated to overseeing and accelerating construction. All the while, the US government participated and invested heavily in the project, despite the fact that no plans were ever made for this highway to extend north to Mexico. The first contributions approved by the United States Congress were some $50,000, which is about $768,000 in today's money, assigned to the early surveying work. Between 1930 and 1933, the U.S. Bureau of Public Roads even actively participated in such surveying. Things got even more serious in the following years. From 1934 to 1943, Congress authorized a further investment of $87 million, almost $1.3 billion in today's currency. Then from 1950 to 1952, Congress funneled another $24 million towards the highway. These contributions were a massive commitment, especially the funds invested in the 30s and 40s. In that period, Washington's Treasury had other big concerns on its to-do list, minor snags like the Great Depression, for example, or President Roosevelt's New Deal, a plan which required extensive government expenditure in order to grow the economy. Moving into the 1940s, Roosevelt had pledged to support the Allied cause in World War II through the Lend-Lease Act, and then in December 1941, the US fully joined the war. Such a dramatic 15-year period would have left most countries bankrupt, and yet during this challenging time, the US government found it worthwhile to invest in this highway to establish a strong physical link along the vertical axis of the Americas. The political importance of such a link, it can be traced back to 1823. In December of that year, US President James Monroe first articulated the doctrine that bears his name. The Monroe Doctrine warned European powers from interfering in the affairs of the Western Hemisphere and, by extension, formalized the US policy to directly interfere in the Americas against European meddling. For example, in 1865, Washington supported the revolt of Benito Juarez in Mexico against Austrian Emperor Maximilian. The unlucky monarch had been installed on the Mexican throne by Mr. Meddlesome himself, Napoleon III of France. And by the way, we have a fantastic video all about Max and Napoleon III on our sister channel, Geographic, which, if you got time, definitely check out. The Mexican affair set the precedent for a series of US diplomatic and military interventions in Latin America. During the first years of the 20th century, US Marines intervened in Santo Domingo in 1904, Nicaragua in 1911, and Haiti in 1915. According to Washington's own National Archives, these interventions ostensibly protected those countries from military action by European creditors, but they extended the US sphere of influence along the way. Even without citing diplomatic doctrines, the US investment in the Autopista Americana was dictated by a long-term plan arranged by the federal government with private enterprises. The aim was to boost future trade with southern neighbors, to encourage the growth of the automobile industry, or simply to provide a convenient supply route for existing industrial and mining sites. A monumental example of one of these sites is the Chuquicamata copper mine in Chile, one of the largest excavation sites in the world. It started as a government-owned enterprise and was bought by the Guggenheim family in 1912. Copper was not the only South American commodity badly needed by Washington. A CIA report issued in 1952, when the Cold War had just got heated in Korea, recognized the strategic importance of Latin America in providing supplies for the military. Latin America at present supplies the US with over 30 strategic mineral, fiber, and chemical products. The area is the only Western Hemisphere source of 13 essential materials, including tin, cordage fibers, mica, quartz crystals, and monazite. Monazite is a primary ore of thorium, a highly radioactive metal which could be used as a replacement for uranium in nuclear power generation. And I'll let you ponder the strategic implications of that in an age of atomic standoff as we continue with our journey. But just before we do continue with that journey, I want to take a moment to tell you about today's fantastic sponsor, Squarespace. Now, a couple of things. First of all, maybe you've got an idea for some new business that you want to start, or maybe it's just an idea for something like a podcast or whatever. Well, two, the only way to find out whether that's a good idea is to actually try it, and you're going to need a website to get that idea out into the world. Squarespace allow you to create a powerful website for whatever you're up to. You want to sell something online? Yes. Easy to set up a store with Squarespace. You want to do a podcast? Sure. You can do that on Squarespace too. It all starts on Squarespace with a beautiful template that you can customize to your heart's content, or you can start from scratch, or you can easily move over from an existing domain, making everything super easy to manage. Don't start from scratch though, just use a template. No excuses. And once you've gone through the super easy customization process, there are no updates, there are no patches, there's no tech BS to deal with. And Squarespace also handles all of the website-y stuff. Like I say, they do podcasts, but also mailing lists, social integrations, that sort of stuff, plus 24/7 support in case you get stuck, which you probably won't. But you know, it's there just in case you need it. So head to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/geographics and you'll save 10% off your first purchase of a website or a domain. And let's get back to it. For its Central American segment, the Autopista will treat travelers to not one, not two, but 6 capital cities of the region. The first 3 off the list are Mexico City, then Guatemala City, and then San Salvador. The first official segment of the Autopista Americana, the Mexican one, is the only stretch of this road that was built without any US contribution. Traveling here may also require some caution, as the Autopista is frequently used by the local drug cartels as a vital artery to smuggle their goods. The state of Guanajuato, in particular, is under the shadow of the cartel. Over a single week in December 2019, the cartel murdered 12 police officers, dumping the bodies of 4 of them on the Autopista Americana. After leaving Mexico behind, the trip continues through Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, and Costa Rica. After leaving the Costa Rican capital, San Jose, the Autopista will take drivers through one of its most difficult sections, which reaches an elevation of almost 11,000 feet at the Cerro de la Muerte, the Mountain of Death. This part of the highway is dead steep, riddled with potholes concealed by fog, blind corners, and plunging cliffs. Careful drivers may want to take this road very slow, but still should watch out for the more experienced and aggressive ones who will take huge risks when overtaking. Depending on the season, the journey will be made even more interesting by fast winds, flash floods, and landslides. But travelers will be rewarded at the top. On a clear day, visitors will be treated to 360-degree views of a lush jungle, framed by both the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans on the horizon. Leaving the mountain behind, the autopista enters Panama, where soon drivers will have the chance to cross over the famous canal over the Bridge of the Americas. This is the rare encounter of two of the greatest engineering marvels of the world. The last stop in Panama is the town of Yavisa, and here it may feel like having reached literally the last stop as the autopista ends abruptly. And hang on, I hear you say, Simon, didn't you say that the Panamericana was going to go all the way down into the tip of Argentina? Well, yes, it is going to eventually, but there is another dangerous spot here, and this one cannot be traversed conventionally. And that's the Darien Gap. To this day, no roadworks have taken place in the gap, which constitutes a 60-kilometer, 100-mile intermission in the autopista. The work here was never completed for a whole variety of reasons. The Darien is one of the most inhospitable areas of the world, a terrain covered by thick jungles, swamplands, and mountains inhabited by jaguars and venomous snakes. In the 16th and 17th centuries, Spanish and Scottish settlers tried to build their respective colonies in the Darien Isthmus, but all attempts ended in disaster. You can learn more about this in our Geographic episode, The Darien Venture. Up until the 20th and even the 21st century, the area remains as difficult and expensive to build into as it was hundreds of years ago. Adding to that, there are other concerns. First of all, the area is home to several protected species, as well as indigenous groups like the Embera Wunan and the Kuna. The construction of a road would pose a threat to their traditional cultures. Then there is a serious public health and economic worry. Central and Northern American health authorities estimate that a road in the Darien would facilitate the spread of foot and mouth disease north of Panama. This is a deadly viral disease which affects cows, among other animals. In other words, a unified autopista is too much of a risk for cattle farmers and the meat industry. Crossing the gap remains a dangerous adventure up to this day, as one may risk running into drug traffickers, local gangs, or Colombian guerrilla factions. And yet, the challenge has attracted some die-hard souls. In 1959, the Trans-Darien Expedition managed to travel the Darien in 136 days. 2 days later, a team of 3 Chevrolet Corvairs repeated the enterprise, but only 2 emerged from the jungle. Both expeditions had to rely on boats for some of the passages. It wasn't until 1971 that British man Ian Hibble completed the first fully overland crossing of the Gap on a bicycle. More travelers have braved the Darien Emerald Hell in the following years, but I would like to remember especially those who did it on foot. In 1979, evangelist Arthur Blessett walked the length of the Darien while carrying a 12-foot wooden cross as part of a pilgrimage around the world. In 1989, George Megan also traversed the Gap, walking in a south to north direction. This was part of his challenge to walk the entire length of the Pan American Highway, which he completed in 2,425 days. But not all of those who cross the Darien do it to beat a record. Journalist Adam Yamaguchi of CBS reported about the trials endured by migrants, not only from South America, who have to travel this route on foot to make it eventually to North America. For regular travelers or holidaymakers, the most common option to bypass the Darien is to catch a ferry to reach Colombia, or even, as some travel bloggers suggest, sell their car, fly to Colombia, and buy a new one once they're over there. In Colombia, drivers can put their cars in turbo as they resume the autopista in, well, turbo, a port city on the Gulf of Urabá. In Colombia, the autopista will make its way through Medellin and Cali before crossing the border into Ecuador. The next big city on the horizon is the Ecuadorian capital, Quito, which at 9,350 feet is the second highest capital city in the world. From Quito to Valparaiso, Chile, the autopista will closely shadow the Pacific coastline of the South American landmass, cutting through all of Peru. As reported by the Smithsonian Magazine, this section also ranks as one of the most dangerous ones of the whole journey. The road here is lined with thousands of crosses bearing the names and dates of death of accident victims. The reason for this high high death toll is the excessive traffic of heavy commercial vehicles bearing dangerous cargo. For example, on August 13, 2005, just north of the town of Casma, a minibus struck a vehicle carrying combustible fluids. This resulted in a deadly explosion which killed 14 people. Leaving behind Peru and entering Chile, drivers are welcomed by the Atacama Desert. This area is also not one to take lightly, as it is the driest, non-polar region in the world. The desert is larger than the whole country of Panama and sits at an elevation of 7,900 feet. It receives only 15 millimeters of rainfall a year. By comparison, annual rainfall in the Sahara is 100 millimeters. Yet, the well-prepared, well-hydrated tourist can enjoy otherworldly sights such as the Rainbow Valley. This is where flanks of cliffs reveal layers of green, blue, pink, and yellow minerals. There's also the Moon Valley, an extraterrestrial landscape which may get many conspiracy theorists wondering if Aldrin, Armstrong, and Collins were really just in South America in 1969. Finally, there is the Death Valley, where steep, sharp rock formations issue a palpable threat to those who venture here. From Valparaiso in central Chile, the autopista veers west, climbing up the Andes before plunging into the tunnel Cristo Redentor. 3 kilometers long, it connects Chile to Argentina and its luscious pampas, the fertile lowlands once home of the legendary gauchos. After journeying through this expanse of grass, drivers will reach the Argentine capital, Buenos Aires, the last stop of the official route of the Autopista Americana. But once one gets there, why not go through to the end of the world? Heading south on Argentina National Route 3, there are only 3,000 more kilometers to go. The road will require crossing the border again with Chile and ferrying across the Straits of Magellan before reaching Tierra del Fuego, back again in Argentina. Here awaits the final stop, the world's most southerly city, Ushuaia. Originally, Ushuaia was Argentina's biggest penal colony, where many anarchists were exiled from the mainland. The prisoners transformed the area, razing the city from scratch, building whole streets of houses, bridges, and railways. Nowadays, it maintains its atmosphere of a frontier town, albeit one that is full of attractions for tourists. A trip such as one along this highway or autopista is a true adventure, one undertaken without a destination for the sole purpose of enjoying the journey. Dangerous, but exciting. I'll conclude with a quote from the great Bruce Chatwin, one who knew one or two things about Patagonia and about traveling in general. The real home of man is not his house, but the road. And I really hope you did find that video interesting. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up below. Don't forget to subscribe. Also, please do check out our fantastic sponsor for this episode, Squarespace, and I'll see you next time.